Hey guys, welcome to the second lecture on the juniper tree. Now, before moving on to today's lecture, let me give you a brief recap of the story discussed so far. You may listen to me and watch the tale. A long time ago, a man and his wife loved each other greatly, but were sorrowful, and as they had no children, and prayed fervently for one. One day, when the woman was peeling an apple under the juniper tree in the garden, she cut her finger, and the blood dripped on the snow. She wished for a child as red as blood and as white as snow, and felt happy. Spring came. As the berries grew on the juniper tree, a child grew in her womb. The woman gorged herself on berries from the juniper tree until she fell sick and asked that if she died, she be buried under the tree. The woman finally bore a son as white as snow and as red as blood, and died of joy. The man was heartbroken, and he wept for days. After a time, he felt better and was eventually ready to take a second wife. So that was our tale. Moving on with the story. He had a daughter by the second wife. So this is the daughter. The child was the daughter. So he had a daughter by the second wife, but the first wife's child was a little son. So you know, in England there is this law called the law of the primogenitor. Now I've given the definition here. So according to the law of primogeniture, the firstborn legitimate child will inherit the parents' main estate or the entire property. So if the child is a firstborn and if he is a legitimate heir, then he would inherit the entire property of the father as well as the mother. So this was the firstborn child of the rich man. Hence, he was the primogenitor. He was the first son, and hence he would eventually inherit the property owned by the rich man. So the child was as red as blood and as white as snow, as his mother had wished for. When the woman looked at her daughter, she loved her very much. But when she looked at the little boy, it pierced her heart, for she thought that he would always stand in her way. So the woman here is referring to the rich man's second wife. So see here, the first reference to the second wife is as the another wife. Okay, another wife, that is the first reference, and the second reference is as the second wife. So it is as if they are trying to dehumanize this woman. She is not given a name, she is just referred to as the another wife and the second wife, and she is not given even the adjectives which were devoted to the first wife, because the first wife was described using the adjectives like devote, right? She was a devout and beautiful and pious lady, and the second wife is just described using adjectives like another wife, second wife, etc. So it is as if they are trying to dehumanize the second wife. And again, she is referred to as the woman. So when the woman looked at her daughter, she loved her very much. But then she looked at the little boy, and it pierced her heart, for she thought that he would always stand in her way. So whenever the woman looked at the boy, it pierced her heart, because she felt, pierced her heart means kutti novikya nu parayile. So it pierced her heart, and she thought that this boy is going to be in her way. So he would always stand in her way because he is the firstborn son. So in any patriarchal setup, the firstborn son would inherit the property, right? So this boy would always stand in the second mother's way. She was always thinking how she could get the entire inheritance for her daughter. So again, the focus of this woman, the second woman, is on the inheritance of the rich man, the wealth that the rich man has procured, his family, the rich man and his ancestors has procured over the years. So her focus is solely on the wealth. So she was always thinking of how she could get the entire inheritance for her daughter. So the stepmother is eager to control the family's wealth. Now it will cause familial discord. So whenever a person is trying to control everything, whenever a person is controlling in a family, it would create a whole lot of familial discord. It would create a whole lot of trouble within the family. There will be constant bickerings, fightings and scoldings each other, battling with each other. This would happen if a person is a very controlling person, and if there is a controlling person in the family, then this would happen. And the stepmother here is eager to control the entire family's wealth. So it will inevitably cause familial discord. It will create dispute among the family members. Familial discord means a kind of dispute which would eventually arise among the family members. And it would even lead to child abuse. It would lead to domestic abuse. So this would happen if a person is controlling in a family. And even the evil one filled her mind with this until she grew very angry with the little boy, and she pushed him from one corner to other and slapped him here and cuffed him there until the poor child was always afraid, for when he came home from school there was nowhere he could find any place. So again, this woman, the lady, the second wife, is portrayed as the evil one. Remember, this third adjective used to describe the lady is as the evil one. Later on it becomes a kind of moniker, a nickname for this lady. She becomes the evil one. So again, this is the first description of the wife as the evil one, but again later on we'll constantly see this description where the second wife is depicted as the evil one. If you remember, I said in my first lecture that in fairy tales there is this trope of the evil stepmother. So the second wife of a man and the stepmother is always portrayed as an evil figure. And here too, they are not breaking the convention of the fairy tale, and here also she is referred to as the evil one. Okay, so the first description as such of the wife as the evil one appears here, and later on you could see the same description, and it later on becomes a moniker. It becomes a nickname sort of a thing to describe her. So she filled her mind with all sorts of evil thoughts. She grew very angry with the little boy and she pushed him from one corner to the other. See here, as I said earlier, I had already predicted that if a person is controlling, then it would eventually lead to abuse within the family. It would lead to domestic abuse, it would lead to child abuse, and that's precisely what is happening in the next line. She grew very angry with the little boy and she pushed him from one corner to the other and slapped him here and there and cuffed him there. Oh my God, she's cuffing him. Cuffing him means she's chaining him here and there until the poor child was always afraid, for he came home from school, there was nowhere he could find any place. So the child was tortured and abused, battered black and blue by the second wife. So in these lines we could also see that the trope of the evil stepmother is introduced. An evil stepmother would always abuse his stepsons or stepdaughters, like in the tale of Cinderella, like in the tale of Snow White. The evil stepmother always abused their stepsons and stepdaughters, and the same trope is introduced here, and the second wife comes across as abusive. One day, the woman had gone upstairs to her room when her little daughter came up too and said, "Mother, give me an apple." "Yes, my child," said the woman, and gave her a beautiful apple out of the chest. The chest had a large heavy lid with large sharp iron lock. So here, one day the woman had gone upstairs to her room, and the little daughter came to her and she asked for an apple, and she said, "Yes, my child." Now this "yes, my child" also has got significance, because later on the same daughter asks her if she had given the apple to her brother, that is the stepson, and the mother grows angry and she says that, yeah, when he comes from school I'll give it to him. So this again shows that she is in control of the family and the property. She demonstrates a motivation to attain wealth through managing the family and its property. So she always wishes to manage the family. She is the homemaker. So she manages the family and she is in control of the family's wealth. So here, for example, she gladly gives her daughter an apple when it is asked. So that's again there. Even in the case of wealth, or even in the case of anything for that matter, within the family, there is always a dynamic, right? If there is a very controlling person in the family, it can be anyone, it can be a mother, it can be a father, it can be anyone. So if there is a controlling person in the family, that person controls the finances, that person controls even the food that is given to you, right? So nowadays there is a huge furore on the kind of food that is given to women as well as to men in the household. Some say that women are impoverished because they are not given enough food, and the food always goes to the men. So that happens in patriarchal households, where man is always kept at the pedestal, and the first food is served to him, and then the food is served to the wife, and then the food is served to the children, and then it is served to the wife. Now things are changing a bit, but still this happens, where the first or the huge part of the food that is cooked within the household goes to the men, and then it goes to the children, and the poor mother who has cooked the food would only get a little amount of food, and she won't be complaining. She will be happily living off that whatever little which was left behind by her husband and her children. So this is again there. But in some household, again, women have control over the food, they have control over the rations, they have control over wealth, and they know where to give and where not to give. So it is always there. And here also, this lady is in control of the family, she is managing the family, and she gladly gives the apple when her daughter asks for it. This shows that she is willing to give her daughter whatever that she asks for. Whatever that she asks for, her wish is being fulfilled. But the same cannot be said about the boy, because the boy is beaten black and blue, and I don't think that the boy would get a fair share of food from her. "Yes, my child," said the woman, and gave her a beautiful apple out of the chest. The chest had a large heavy lid with a large sharp iron lock. So here there is a detailed description of the chest in which the apple is kept. So the chest in which the apple was kept had a large heavy lid. Now you may know a chest, right? So this is a chest. This is a treasure chest. So you might just think that this is a chest which was filled with apples, for that matter. So usually in old homes there was always a chest in which they kept the grains, and they kept the food articles, and they kept the valuables. So again, in this huge chest, apples were kept. And the chest is described in detail. Why is that so? Because it has an element of foreshadowing. So it is a literary device which is used in short stories, it is used in novels. Whenever a thing is described in detail, or whenever a person is described in detail, and that too a very trivial thing, or a trivial character, whenever a trivial character is described in detail, or whenever a trivial thing is described in detail, it would eventually have an impact, or it would eventually have a major role within the story. So here the chest is elaborately described. The chest had large heavy lid with large sharp lock. So the sharpness of the iron lock is depicted here. So it shows that something is going to happen, and it has got something to do with the chest. So again, this detailed description of the chest is carries with it an element of foreshadowing, which is a narrative device which is used in stories. It is a narrative device. It is used in narration to indicate foreshadowing. Something is going to happen, and it is closely connected with this chest. That's the meaning of it. Okay. "Mother," said the little girl, "is brother not to have one too?" So the little girl asks her mother that, "Won't you give the apple to my brother too?" This made the woman angry, and she said, "Yes, when he comes home from school. Yes, I'll give it to him when he comes home from school." When from the window she saw him coming, it was as though the evil one, again she is described as the evil one, and take note that here E and O are in caps, again showing emphasis that this is an evil character. Okay, the lady is portrayed as a evil incarnate. So that's why E and O is written in caps. It is used to show emphasis. So the term evil one becomes like a moniker. That is, she is described using this nickname. It becomes as though a nickname. She is described as the evil one now, from now on. Okay. And she grabbed the apple and took it away from her daughter, saying, "You should not have one before your brother." So this suddenly there is a shift in scene. So till now she said that, "I'll give it to your brother once he comes from school," and then suddenly she changes, right? She changes her behavior and says that you must share this apple with your brother. So there is a sudden shift. So till now she said that you must not share the apple, but then it changes. So it becomes somewhat clear that she was scheming, and then she said these words, okay, because it was highly unlikely of her to do this. So till now she came across as an evil stepmother, and suddenly she is saying that you must share you must give the apple first to your brother. So it's highly unlikely that she would utter such words. Okay, so it clearly indicates that the woman here is turning. Okay, there is something that is brewing in her mind, at least. She threw the apple into the chest and shut it, and lo and behold, she threw the apple into the chest and shut it. So something is brewing in her mind, and this is going to be evil. Then the little boy came in the door, and the evil one made her say to him kindly, "My son, do you want an apple?" Again, this is a performative, right? She is making herself to say to him kindly, because it is not there within her to talk kindly to him. She won't talk kindly to this boy. It is by nature. It is not natural. It does not come naturally to her. By nature, she won't talk kindly to the son, and she is making herself do it, which is a performative act. She is making herself speak kindly to him. So then the little boy came in the door, and the evil one made her say to him kindly. Made her say to him means she's making herself say to him in a very kind tone that, "My son, do you want an apple?" So she is asking him, "My son, do you want an apple?" So this was highly unlikely of her to ask him to kindly to have an apple. And she looked at him fiercely. Again, this is there, right? Even if you are talking with a person who has anger and who is totally against you in many ways, the person might speak in a very pleasant tone to you, but their look would deceive them, which means that even if they speak in a very kind tone, their looks would give them out. Their looks would expose them, because here again she is looking at him fiercely. When you look at someone fiercely, it exudes anger. when you are looking at someone fiercely, you are looking at them in a sharp way, and it shows that you are angry at them. Okay, she looked at him fiercely. "Mother," said the little boy, "how angry you look. Yes, give me an apple." So the child immediately perceives the anger that is there within the woman. So it is said that children have innocence, which means that they will be able to perceive the hatred in tone. They will be able to perceive any emotion. And they are like blank slates, right? Children won't be able to hide anything. If they are hiding anything, then they would just smile or laugh. That's the way the children do things. They just smile or laugh at it because they won't be able to hide things from you. But once you become adult, you become masters of hiding things and deceiving people, that even if you have hatred towards someone, you will speak kindly to them, but your looks would expose you. The way in which you look at that person would expose you. In the way in which the woman, the second mother, the evil one, looked at her son, she looked at him fiercely. It exposed her, and the child was immediately able to perceive the anger in her look. Okay, so here again it shows that the boy knew that the stepmother never liked him, yet he lacked the agency to state the same. That is, whenever she beated him or whenever she abused him, the boy knew that the stepmother hated him. So, but he never exposed her. He never said that she was an evil woman. Okay. The boy knew that the stepmother never liked him, yet he lacked the agency to state the same. Even to his father, he never said. Because had he said that, surely she would have been replaced. Because this was the time in which, even if she was a wife, she would be replaced, right? So the boy knew that the stepmother never liked him, yet he lacked the agency to state the same. As a child victim, he was powerless, living under his stepmother's rule after his mother's death. So he was powerless. He never said ill about his mother because he was born as a motherless boy, and it might have been this woman who took care of him, right? Because even she was not even there to wean him. She was not even there to give nourishment to him at a very young age. So this might have been the woman who took care of him. So though he knew that the stepmother never liked him, he never exposed her. He never said that she disliked him, to even to his father for that matter. So he appears as a child victim. As a child victim, he was powerless because he was living under the shade of this stepmother, and hence he could not utter a word against her. Okay, so even though he is able to perceive her anger, he is not able to utter a word against her. Then it seemed to her as if he had to persuade him. So he felt that this boy is not going to eat the apple because he knows that she hates him. Within his mind, he knows that she hates him. So she had to persuade him. What do you mean by persuade? Persuade means she's trying to coax him. She's trying to convince him to eat the apple. So she tried to coax or convince him into eating apple. "Come with me," she said, opening the lid of the chest. So she opened the lid of the chest and asked him to come towards her. "Take out an apple for yourself." And while the child was leaning over, the evil one prompted her, and crash! She slammed down the lid and his head flew off, falling among the red apples. See how horrific it had become? "Take out an apple for yourself," she said. So it's like tempting, right? She can be compared to Eve, who tempted Adam with an apple. So take out an apple for yourself. So she's tempting the boy to eat the apple. Even in the tale of Snow White, the witch is tempting Snow White to eat the apple. Similarly, take out an apple for yourself. So apple often appears as an element of sin. So wherever there is apple, there is a concept of sin which is associated with it. Okay, so again it becomes a symbol of sin also. So take out an apple for yourself. So whenever a person eats an apple, the person is damned. See, when Adam and Eve ate apple, they were damned. Similarly, when Snow White ate apple, she went into a coma. So again, she was damned. And then again here, when the child eats apple, he's killed, he's beheaded. Take out an apple for yourself. And while the little boy was leaning over, the evil one prompted her. So again, it is as if this lady has two personalities, because this line is very ambiguous. And while the little boy was leaning over, the evil one prompted her. It is said not him, it is said her. So the evil one may have resided within her. So here again, the evil one prompted her means it can have two meanings. Okay, one is that from time immemorial, whenever the word evil one is used, it has got negative connotations. Evil one often refers to demons, devils and the like. Okay, so here the evil one can also mean a devil. So in the olden times, it was quite common that a woman might be possessed by devil. Often she appears as a witch. If you have seen Conjuring series, in the first movie there is a witch and she is haunted by a demon, right? A demon enters her body. So the evil one prompted her might be a reference to a demon outside, or it might be a reference to her split personality or a split persona, wherein on one hand she appears as a nurturer, but on the other hand she is a destroyer. So on the one hand she is providing food to her children, but on the other hand she wishes her stepson to be dead. So it shows that there are two possibilities. Either this woman is schizophrenic, or she has a split personality, whereby her personality is divided into two. One is evil and the other being nurturer. And it also has got another connotation, which is that the woman might be purely evil. She is like a satanic force. She is in demonic force. Again, portraying women as demons were quite common in those days. Portraying second wives as demons or witches was quite common in those days. Okay, so this was always there. And the evil one prompted her. That's why I said the verb here used is prompted, and then there is the object, which is again her, which means that she was prompted by someone. She was influenced by someone, and that someone might have been the devil himself. And crash, she slammed down the lid. So it was she who slammed the lid of the chest. She closed the chest. So this lid, this lid of the chest, she closed the lid of the chest. She slammed the lid of the chest, and his head flew off, falling among the red apples. So his red head fell down. It got cut, it got beheaded, and it fell among the red apples. Again, the red apples here can symbolize blood. So again here the word crash is used, remember. So crash is a dialect or a term. Again, a critic says that it comes from hitting a body part. Okay, it is crash is a dialect term, and it comes from Pomeranian. It comes from a dialect which means hitting a body part. Crash or brash means it is the dialect. See, Grimm's fairy tales were written in German, and in German there is this term brash. This original term which was used was brash, and brash in German meant hitting a body part. So if you hit a body part, then that sound is brash. Okay, so crash here is a dialectical term, and it refers to it is a German term, and it refers to hitting a body part. Okay, so again it has a connotation. So crash, brash, these are all onomatopoeic words. Now onomatopoeia is a literary device. You might be familiar with it, at least some of you might be familiar with it. Onomatopoeia is a literary device where words are created by imitating sounds. Like crash is an imitation of the sound, right? When you crash, okay, it's an imitation of sound. Then platter, plop, etc. are imitation of sounds, or cuckoo is an imitation of a sound. It's a imitation of the call of a cuckoo bird, coo coo. So it is imitation of a sound, right? So here again, brash is a dialect and it comes from German, and it was brash in the original version, and it meant hitting someone on the body, and here it functions as a foreshadowing. So the word crash is also onomatopoeic. Onomatopoeic means the sound here formed the word. So the word was formed by imitating the sound, and it also indicates foreshadowing, which means that towards the end of the story, something will come crashing onto this lady too, and it would serve as a poetic justice to this boy who is killed. So it functions as a percussive foreshadowing of the reversal of justice. So towards the end, there will be some kind of a reversal of justice, and then again this word crash would appear. So it appears as a foreshadowing, just like the sharp blades of the chest were mentioned earlier in detailed description. It was also a foreshadowing, and this is also an element of foreshadowing. So in the future, something will come crashing, and if you have read the story, you might know what comes crashing. Others, you just have to listen. Okay, so this is what is going to happen. It functions as a foreshadowing in when the reversal of fortune or the reversal of justice takes place. It functions as a foreshadowing element. And it also foreshadows the grotesque way in which the boy's body is disposed of. Again, his bones and everything that is being disposed of, the grotesque way in which his bones are disposed of, all these are indicated by the sound crash. Crash also indicate the way in which his body and his bones are disposed of. Okay, so that's there. I hope that it was clear till here. So take out an apple for yourself, and while the little boy was leaning over, the evil one prompted her, and crash, she slammed down the lid and his head flew off, falling among the red apples. So she uses the box with the large iron lock to decapitate his head while he reaches for the apple. Decapitate means, tala vetti kalaya. So decapitate. Now, then fear overcame her. So whenever you do something horrible, then immediately you are hit by guilt, right? Guilt comes in. Fear comes in. Fear overcame her. So here she was not feeling guilty, but she felt fearful because she had done or she had committed a sin. Then fear overcame her, and she thought, maybe I can get out of this. So she thought that, okay, I can get out of this. I'll find a way to get out of this thing. So she went upstairs to her room, to her chest of drawers, and took a white scarf out of the top drawer and set the head on the neck, again tying the scarf around so that nothing could be seen. Then she set him on the chair in front of the door and put the apple in his hand. So she did was, she propped this boy. She placed him in a chair. He properly propped him. She placed the decapitated or the severed head onto his body, onto his torso. And what she did was, she went to her room. She reached out to the top drawer, took a white handkerchief and covered the neck of the boy with the white handkerchief. So now he is propped. The dead body of the boy is propped as if he is still alive. Okay, and she made him sit in a bench. Okay, that's what she does, and set the head on the neck again, tying the scarf around it so that nothing could be seen. So she wanted to hide the crime, and then she set him on a chair, and she put him on a chair in front of the door and put an apple in his hand. Okay, so this is a clever way in which she is covering up the crime. So she is a scheming and conniving woman, because she has carefully thought about it. What she's going to do next, she knows. She has planned it really well. So you might think that, oh, this is not the proper way in which one should dispose of a body, because if his father comes, he would immediately identify that the boy is dead, because one the touch would be enough. The head would fall down and he would immediately identify that the boy is dead. But here she is scheming and conniving, because in the coming sessions you would know why she had propped him thus, why she had put him in a chair and she had tried to cover his neck with a scarf, and why she had propped him as if he were alive. After this, Marlene came. Now, who is Marlene? Marlene is the daughter of the rich man and his second wife. So Marlene is the daughter of the rich man and the second wife, and she is the only character in the short story who is given a name. Okay, she is the only character in the short story, and for that matter, if you take the entire Grimm's fairy tales, she might be the only one, or one among the few characters to be given a name in a short story, because usually in short stories the characters are either man or woman, or father or mother, or children. Then there is Hansel and Gretel, and then there is Marlene. So only a few characters are given names, and these names do carry significance. So after this, Marlene came into the kitchen to her mother. So again, the workplace of the second wife is domestic. She works in the domestic domain, which means that she is always there in the house. She is always there in the kitchen. So in the beginning also, when Marlene came, she came to the kitchen to greet her mother. Here also she comes to her mother and she greets her in the kitchen. So the domain in which the second wife works is the kitchen, and it again has got significance. So the stepmother's focus is always on the house. If you remember, the first mother, or the boy's mother, was a woman who was closely connected with nature. She would go and sit near the juniper tree, and the juniper tree gave her the berries which she ate, and she gave birth to a child. So the first wife was closely associated with nature, whereas the second wife is closely associated with the domestic domain. So she's a nurturer. She gives food to all, but she's closely associated with the domestic domain. So it indicates domesticity. So instead of nature, her character is portrayed as being unnatural. She is not closely associated with nature, because when we take the shadows of the first wife, the first wife is often portrayed as being closely associated with nature. Even her entire pregnancy was closely linked with nature. But here is a woman who is closely associated with the domain of her home. Here is a woman who is closely associated with her home and hearth, and here she works in a domestic domain, and this makes her unnatural. So all these points are important from an examination point of view. Don't think that I'm just going on and on explaining it, interpreting it, but all these points are important from an examination point of view. It's not just a simple reference to kitchen. It indicates something else. That's why. Okay, it indicates that the second wife works in the domestic domain, and the first wife was natural. The second wife was unnatural. Okay. So she saw her mother standing by the fire with a pot of hot water before her, and she was stirring round and round. So she had just a pot of hot water and she was stirring it round and round. So whenever someone is stirring it round and round, it again, I am immediately reminded out of the witches and their cauldrons. Okay, they would always stir their cauldron round and round, and whenever a person is thinking too much, a thinker would do things in a circular way, round and round. That's the same way she might be thinking about something. She might be scheming. That's why she is stirring just a pot of water round and round. "Mother," said Marlene, "brother is sitting at the door and he looks totally white and has apple in his hand. So something is amiss, because he looks totally white," and Marlene has identified it. "I asked him to give me the apple, but he did not answer me, and I was very frightened, because this boy is looking pale," and she was really frightened. And maybe this boy might have been cute, because he might have given her apples if she asked for the first time. So that's again pretty unusual of him not to give her apples. "Go back to him," said her mother. And if he will not answer you, then box his ears. So go back to him, and if he does not answer you, box his ears. So this woman is scheming. She is truly a horrible mother, because he knows, and she has clearly she's trying to cover up her crime. So she has clearly tried to cover up her crime, and now she's asking her own daughter to go and box the boy's ears. Box his ears means to slap him flat across his cheek. So this is boxing across the ears. Okay, to slap him across his cheek. Slap someone on the side of the head as a punishment. That is boxing his ears. So this is what happens, slapping someone across the head or on the side of the head as a sign of punishment. So the mother is asking the daughter to be abusive, to be a partner of a crime. Okay, that's again very unlikely, right? So this woman is truly, the character of the woman is unfolding, and she is truly becoming a horrific mother, because she is asking her own daughter to be an accomplice to a crime. Okay, and she knows very well that she had killed the boy, and she wants to give this girl the fright of her life. She wants to frighten this girl. Okay, just remember, this is just a child, and she just wants to frighten the child too. She's not even thinking about her daughter here. She's just thinking about the inheritance. So Marlene went to him and said, "Brother, give me the apple." But he was silent. So she gave him one on the ear, and his head fell off. So Marlene went to him and said, "Brother, give me the apple." But he didn't listen. So she got frustrated and she boxed him in the ear. She hit him. She slapped him right across his face. Okay, so and his head fell off. Marlene had the shock of her life. Marlene was terrified and began crying and screaming, and ran to her mother and said, "Oh mother, I have knocked my brother's head off." And she cried and cried and could not be comforted. Poor thing. She thought that she killed her brother. See, the horror in the story is that the mother let the child believe that she killed her brother. No mother would do that, right? No mother would want their children to believe that they are murderers. But this is precisely what this woman does. She wants her daughter to be like her, an accomplice in crime. That's why she has hidden it from her. So Marlene was terrified, and she began crying and screaming. That shows her innocence. Though she appears to be naive at the beginning, she is innocent. That's why she's screaming and crying, because she cannot take it that she has killed his own brother. "Marlene," said the mother, "what have you done?" Again, see the horror. She's asking the poor child, "What have you done?" In reality, it was the mother who had killed the stepson, and here she is asking her own daughter, "What have you done?" So it shows that it is to hide her transgression. So she had transgressed from her path. She had deviated from her path. She is showing a very deviant behavior, whereby a normal mother or a normal stepmother would nourish and take care of her children. But here the stepmother tricks her own daughter into believing that she is to blame for her brother's death. That's what makes this story a horrible one. Following the stepmother's advice, the daughter knocks her brother's head, and it falls off as it had already been severed from his body. So already the head was cut or beheaded. The boy got beheaded right when she slapped the lid of the chest into his head, right, into his neck. So it snapped right then and there. But again, she presents it as if the daughter had knocked his brother's head off. Okay, so convinced that she has killed her own brother, the daughter becomes an accomplice to the stepmother's additional crimes, as she watches while the boy's corpse is butchered and cooked into a stew, and thereafter his sister remains horrified by violence and is alone in grieving. So this is what happens. So we'll read about it. That is, soon they have to hide this crime too. So she becomes an accomplice to her mother, and she helps her mother in hiding the crime. Now, why might she have done it? Because if Marlene knew that it was a mother who committed the crime, since she is a child and she is innocent, she might have told the truth to her father. So the stepmother wanted to hide the truth from the father at any cost, and she wanted to inherit a huge fortune. So she wanted her child to be an accomplice to her crime. Okay, that's why she put it this way. "What have you done?" said the mother. "Be quiet and don't let anyone know about it." So again, she is coercing, she is forcing Marlene not to divulge the truth, not to give out the truth. So she is making a vow of secrecy. She is making Marlene make a vow of secrecy. Okay, she is coercing her to make a vow of secrecy. "It cannot be helped now. We will cook him into a stew." Oh, cannibalistic element is coming up. So she decides that they will cook him into a stew. Of all things, a stew. Then the mother took the little boy and chopped him into pieces and put him into the pot and cooked him into a stew. Okay, this like rhyming words are coming up. The mother took the little boy, chopped him into pieces, put him into the pot and cooked him into stew. But Marlene stood by crying and crying. So the only person who is grieving the death of the brother is Marlene. So, but Marlene stood crying and crying. So, this beheading scene in the fairy tale illustrate that children are often alienated in families. Okay, it illustrates the height of alienation. The child alone is grieving. She is alienated. She feels distant from her brother. At the beginning, she is in one way or the other. The mother might have made her daughter distant from her step brother, right? And then again, here this child alone is grieving, and it shows that she is desolate. There is nobody grieving along with her. The children are all alone. They are alienated. They feel all alone within the families. That's why she stood crying and crying. Okay, it shows the alienation, the loneliness and the desolate nature of children. Children in all the fairy tales are often desolate. They are not cared by anyone. Be it Snow White, be it Cinderella. Most of the children, even Hansel and Gretel, they are not cared for. "And all her tears fell into the pot, and they did not need any salt." So again, that's a tinge of irony, because she cried and all her tears went to the pot which made the stew, and they didn't have to put any salt in it because it was salted by Marlene's tears. Then the father came home and sat down at the table and said, "Where is my son?" And the mother served up a large dish of stew, and Marlene cried and could not stop. So again, when the father came home, the mother served him a large dish of stew, and then he asked, "Where is the son?" And when he was asking where is the son, it was at that precise moment that she served him a large bowl of stew. So see the irony there. When he asked, "Where is my son?" the mother serves him a large dish of stew which is made of the boy's remains. And Marlene cried and could not stop. So Marlene was the only person who knew the truth behind it. So this is also a grotesque realism, right? So till now, the child was familiar. She felt that she knew her mother. So she felt a familiarity with her mother. She was quite friendly with her mother. She was quite friendly with the brother. But once this familiarity turns hostile, often in families too, this would happen. A person might be very friendly, very familiar, and within days or weeks or months, a small tiff or argument would break out, and suddenly they would turn cold. They would become hostile. The same thing is happening here too. So everyone who was friendly turned hostile, and in our own world, this happens. We are always in a constant state of change, or in a constant state of flux, and everything turns from friendly. People might turn into hostile, and it is this moment that Marlene realizes that her mother is truly wicked and crooked. She has served his father the remains of his own son. So now Marlene realizes that her mother is brutal. Okay, so this is sudden. So whatever that was familiar, whatever that was friendly, suddenly turned hostile, suddenly turned into a negative thing. Then the father said again, "Where is my son?" So the father is inquiring about his son. "Oh," said the mother, "he has gone across the country to his mother's great aunt uncle. He will stay there a while." So again, the kind of reply that she gives, she knows how to cover up, right? He has gone across the country to his mother's great uncle. So she has gone to his mother's great uncle. So if she said that he had gone to the paternal side of the family, then he would immediately know that such a thing never happened. But she is carefully covering it up. She said that the boy went to the mother's side of the family, to the mother's great uncle. So the man won't go there and inquire about him, right? And he will stay there for a while. So he knows how to cover up. So when the father returns home, the stepmother tells him that his son had gone to visit a relative, that too a relative from his maternal side. So it is a clear cover up. What is he doing there? He did not even say goodbye to me. So he said that what is he going to do there? He didn't even have the courtesy to say goodbye to me. Oh, he wanted to go and ask me if he could stay 6 weeks. He will be well taken care of there. So she says that, oh, he will be there for 6 weeks and he will be well taken care of there, and he had asked my permission to go. So again, she controls the household in one way or the other. But again, remember, here the father is insistent that he too must be a part of the family. He too must be informed about these things. When the children go somewhere, he must be informed. So this also shows that the father must be the head of the family and he must be the one who must take the decisions. And this person also believe in this. The rich man also believe in this concept that the father is the head of the family and nothing should happen without the father's consent. Okay, that's why he says, "Oh," said the man, "I am unhappy. It isn't right. He should have said goodbye to me." So again, he said that he should not have gone without informing me. He should have at least have the courtesy to say goodbye to me. Again, this man is also a bit controlling. He too wishes that his family members should tell whatever that is there to him. They should take his consent and then go places. So that's there within him. With that, he began to eat, saying, "Marlene, why are you crying? Your brother will certainly come back." So he says that, "Marlene, why are you crying? Your brother will certainly come back." And then he said, "Wife, this food is delicious. Give me some more." And the more he ate, the more he wanted. And he said, "Give me some more. You two shall have none of it. It seems to me as if it were all mine." Again, see the irony of it. "Wife, this food is delicious. Give me some more." He asks for more, and he's asking for his own son's remains. Okay, the remains of the boy's body do not have to be hidden. Instead, they are consumed. So here they are not hiding the body. She is not trying to bury the body, but she has made a stew out of it and she is serving it to her own husband. So the remains of the body has to be hidden. That's the idea behind it. And they consume it. Eating is again a trait of grotesque. When you gorge and eat, all those words like gorging, eating and consuming, it shows that it shows a wild bestial nature of man. Gorging, etc. It shows the wild bestial nature of man, eating something. Though it is for sustenance and survival, eating always have a grotesque connotation to it. And the more he ate, the more he wanted. The greed that he felt that I don't feel like sharing it with you because I feel like this is all mine. In reality too, it is all his, right? It is his own son. It is his blood. It is his flesh and blood that he is eating. And he ate and ate, throwing all the bones under the table until he finished it all. So he finished it all in one sitting. He ate the child entirely, the stew entirely. He didn't give even a small amount of it to Marlene. He didn't even care to give it to his own wife. So again, that shows that everything that is juicy and good goes to the head of the family. And here, though it is his own child, it is consumed by him. Now, again, these words have a powerful significance. Somehow I feel as if it were all mine. So his growing appetite emphasizes the biological link between the father and the son. So the son was born out of the father, and it shows that the father in one way or the other wants to eat or consume his son entirely and make him a part of his own soul, his own body. So instead of acquisition of power, which made famous through the horrific scene in Snow White in which the evil queen orders her stepdaughter's organs served for dinner, the son's experience seemed to complete the circular motion of life started by the gentle mother-baby paradigm, in which his mother eats berries from the garden and dies in childbirth, and here the father's dining experience allow the son to return to the father's body and ultimately home. So I'll be explaining this. See, here there is a link between the father and the son, and it is quite biological. The son is an image, is born as an image of the father, and the father consumes his son. Now in the story of Snow White 2, the queen orders huntsmen to kill Snow White and bring her Snow White's internal organs. Okay, and that was because the queen wanted to acquire power, because Snow White was the legal heir there too. She was the primogenitor, she was the legitimate heir, and she wanted to acquire power, and hence she asked for the entrails or the organs of her stepdaughter. So there it was a power play. She wanted to consume the organs of Snow White. The evil queen wanted to consume the organs of Snow White because by eating or consuming the organs she would become powerful. That's what she believed. So there is a direct comparison that you can make between Snow White and this story. Okay, so there Snow White consumed whatever that was there, left the entrails. She wanted to consume Snow White's internal organs because by eating those internal organs she thought that she would acquire power. But here the boy is consumed by his own father. In a way he is returning back to his home, right? His mother gorged or ate the berries. So it was there at the beginning of the story. She eats or gorges on the berries, and she gives birth to the child, and the child in turn is consumed by the father, and the child becomes a part of the father. The child is born out of the father, and in a way the child is returning back to his home, returning back to the body of the father, which was in the beginning his home, right? Returning back to the body of the father, which was in the beginning his home. So that is the concept behind it. Now again, Marlene went to her chest of drawers, took her best silk scarf from the bottom drawer, and gathered all the bones from beneath the table. So the mother took a white scarf from the top drawer, and the daughter takes a silk scarf from the bottom drawer. Mother took the white scarf to conceal the sin that she had committed, but the daughter is taking the silk scarf to as a way of redemption. She wishes to redeem her soul. She wishes to lighten her sin. That's why she takes a silk scarf, that too the best scarf from the drawer, and gathered all the bones from beneath the table. So remember, her father had, her father ate the remains of his child. He ate the entire stew all by himself and left the bones under the table. And the girl picks up all the bones from beneath the table. She ties them up in her silk scarf and then carried them outside the door, crying tears of blood. So she carried the bones of her brother and she cried tears of blood. She laid them down, that is the remains which was tied up in the silk scarf. She laid them beneath the juniper tree on the silk grass, and after she had put them there, she suddenly felt better and did not cry anymore. So she placed the scarf beneath the juniper tree, the scarf which is filled with his brother's bones, beneath the juniper tree. And when she placed it beneath the juniper tree, she felt that her heart got lightened. She felt better and she stopped crying. So here again there is an image. Marlene takes the responsibility of the burial of her brother. So it is a humanist act, which is an act of memorialization, which means that she is trying to remember him by it's an act of service. It's like she wants to remember him. So it is a humanist act of memorialization, where she wishes to give him a proper burial, because he thinks that she thinks that he deserves it, which she performs with decorum as an act of love. So she carefully takes the silk scarf from her lower drawer, and then she puts the entire bones inside it, ties it up, and buries it under the juniper tree. So she observes proper decorum. She's not desecrating the body of the dead like her mother did. She's not desecrating, or she's not trying to tamper the body of her brother. Instead, she is trying to give him a proper burial. Marlene collects herself as well as the bones to bury them under the juniper tree. So you need, if you are going to do a thing like that, you need a certain amount of courage, right? So she is collecting herself as well as the bone and trying to bury it under the juniper tree. So Marlene went to her dresser, took out the best silk handkerchief from the bottom drawer, gathered all the bones from beneath the table, tied them up in her silk handkerchief, and carried them outside the door. So Marlene's agency completes the rebirth of her brother. So here Marlene has got the agency. Marlene is doing something. All the others, her mother also has the agency. She wishes to control the entire household. She wishes to accumulate the wealth. But other than that, Marlene also has got the agency. Okay, she has got the agency to do something right. She completes the rebirth cycle of her brother. So and how is she doing that? Because it was his father who initiated the rebirth cycle, which means that the father unknowingly consumed the remains of his son, and it is there within him. So now the body and the remains of the child has gone deep into the father's body. So it has returned back to the home. And now Marlene is completing the cycle. She is honoring her brother's memory, and she's honoring the dead, and thus by honoring the dead, both the child Marlene as well as the dead brother rises from victimhood. They are no longer victims. They hold some agency. So in the next part of the story, we will come to know about the agency of the brother, how he is able to assert himself after his death. But here Marlene shows her agency. She comes across as a very brave character to give his own brother a proper burial. So usually children won't do that, but she picks herself up as well as she picks the bones up, and then she buries it under the tree. Now another thing is that usually in fairy tales characters won't have a name, but here Marlene has a name. So it is one among the Grimm's fairy tale in which a character has got a name. And Marlene also comes across as a round character, because at the beginning of the story she is portrayed as being naive, and then she follows her mother's orders, and she helps her mother in butchering and serving her brother as a stew. So again it shows that she is remorseful of her actions. That's why she feels that she must not have done it. So she feels guilty of her actions. That is the meaning of remorseful. So she is guilty of her actions, and what she does is that she buries him. She gives him a proper burial and allows him to be transformed into a bird. So it again illustrates the circular motion of life. It is Marlene who helps her brother to complete the circle of life. Now Marlene demonstrates agency through her actions, and it redeems her. In a way, though she had committed a sin, though she is complicit to the crime that her mother committed, though she had in one way or the other, though unknowingly again, had supported her mother in covering up the crime, she redeems herself because she gives his brother's remains a proper burial, and that raises her from victimhood. She's not a mere victim of circumstances. She wishes to do something to change the bad thing that had happened. So she wishes to do something to change the horrific, and in doing so she becomes a true character. She becomes a round character, and she becomes a soul who is redeemed. So I hope that it was clear. The lecture was long, sorry for that, but I hope that the entire thing was clear to you. Please go through it. Take care.